youth, the experience of youth with trauma, right? Talking about seeing violence in the community and different assaults that they had on their integrity. And so that's what this video is about. Earlier, I talked about the impact of trauma. I'm going to wrap up quickly, so I'm going to run through these slides pretty quickly because Malik wants to come up here and take you all to church with his presentation style. I know he's just hungry to come up here. So I'm going to give him
Malik Muhammad taking me to church. That's interesting.
See? Yeah. So it's not the stereotype. I'm not saying taking you to the mosque.
Excuse me, what was the name of that video?
Through Our Eyes. Through Our Eyes. And I could give you the link at the break if you want to exact link to it. So increased impact on cognition is the idea that changes how you see the world. Everyone will hurt me. I'm defective. I'm worthless. I can't trust anyone. You're going to hurt me. So these are the responses, these are the thoughts that lead to the behaviors, the triggers. So there's a variety of ways that it affects our youth, socially, behaviorally, cognitively. Socially, there's the isolation, and we talked about that. Difficulty in trusting, and we talked about that. Again, it makes sense. So you may form stereotypes about certain people because it's difficult to have trust, and if you've been the victim of trauma from an adult, adults may be particularly difficult to trust. Poor anger management. You know, you're emotionally dysregulated. It's hard to manage those uncomfortable feelings. We say that anger is often a secondary emotion. But if we don't have the ability to talk about our feelings, if we don't have an emotional vocabulary, we quickly can go to anger. We can escalate very quickly. And it can lead to passivity or it can lead to bullying. So socially, these are some of the things we might see, right? Cognitively, difficulty in coding information, poor functioning, feeling of incompetence. So this is how it affects our thinking. And then behaviorally, I talked about the social isolation, the aggressiveness, the stress disorders, psychosomatic complaints about how you're feeling, either overachievement or having full problems. So I'm not going to go through this exercise because of time, but the point of the exercise is to talk about how stressful messages can lead to two responses. It can lead to the response of exploding, so it was to shake the soda bottle, saying I'm going to have one of you all shake the soda bottle and spill all over you, and someone else have water and not spill it. So the one with the soda bottle was about the fact that you emotionally explode. So sometimes our youth act out that way, right? We talked about externalizing disorder. So it's not surprising when we see our youth irritable and acting out and angry and cursing because they don't have the emotional vocabulary at times, right? So they have a good behavioral vocabulary. But that's not the only response. The other response could be the numbing, the isolation, having a restricted range of emotion. That's another response. So we can't assume that the kid that's just acting out is one who has a traumatic past. The kid who's withdrawn, sometimes we overlook that particular group of students. And I kind of went through these, so.
One of the things that I have a hard time with with my staff and even with myself is that I think it's like cognitively we want to prioritize trauma, like that this trauma is worse than that trauma. And sometimes based on the child's response, I think sometimes that validates that for us, like based on how a child is responding, if they're withdrawing versus acting out, or sometimes prone to think, well, maybe it wasn't that bad. Oh, so like maybe, they seem to be doing okay, so it must not be that bad. Because I work with child care staff and with teachers who aren't maybe as
versed on it,
things, and they say, well, they're not being disruptive, so it couldn't have been that traumatizing.
Yeah.
And so just having a conversation with adults about that, trauma is relative to that person, and that if you experience this trauma versus that trauma, your trauma isn't worse or more horrific or better or less, based on how they're acting.
Right. Yeah, you cannot define it based on the behavior, right? I mean, there's a way to assess, and there's like the UCLA, and there's measures to assess, trauma symptoms and the extent of intrusive thoughts of one trauma versus the other. But I do agree with you. I think we often do overlook the kids that are quieter, that are not acting out, that have more of what we call the internalizing stuff. The internalizing stuff, like the depression and the sadness. And so we do, and we've done that in the alternative schools too, with our staff, with our therapists, that oftentimes we don't spend as much time with the kid that's quiet, that's not a problem in the classroom, because they think, well, that kid's okay. There's nothing wrong. It's always the kid that's acting out that we want to kind of attend to. And so that's those assumptions we have to challenge, right? And that comes with more training. Because again, what I said is really what maintains PTSD, if that's the diagnosis, is not the hyperarousal symptoms, and it's not the re-experiencing that maintains it. You can take medication for re-experiencing symptoms, and you can take medication for hyperarousal symptoms. You cannot take medication for numbing symptoms. You just don't. It doesn't work. The only way you really change that is you focus on the avoidance piece, right? And that's why often the treatment for those who have post-traumatic stress disorder is exposure-based therapy. You expose them to the aversive stimulus so they learn that they can remember something. So remembering is different from reliving. That's what I was talking to you about. So when you hold that stuff in and you don't talk about it, so like either taking that bottle and you explode, or you just stay withdrawn. You don't work through and process that traumatic memory. You don't digest that properly. So that's a really excellent point. I'm closing out. I've been up here for a minute. I'm going to pass it to Malik. And then I know there's an opportunity for more questions and stuff later on.
So let's just take another 5-minute break. We'll switch out some things, but please come on back in 5 minutes.
Your phone rang. If you didn't
Yeah, I
hear
heard it.
it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you know what, it's on me for me. Actually, I think the link is right here. Lily, can you go to that Blue Eyes real quick? I think I can give her the exact link.
So yeah, come up here with me. I'll write it down for you.
Oh, actually,
You know what I think?
Did you close out that first?
Yeah.
but that's, you know what, that's okay. I'll do it. Did you just finish the form that you did for the template? That way I can put the computer with the rest of it. Because when you get to it, you have to talk about that. It's going to go to a page, and then you have to click on it, and so you can just, that's all you see. So you were saying that you want to see? Yeah. Okay. Did you cross it off? No, I wrote it on the line. That's why I realized that was really helpful too. So I didn't try to limit it.
Be bilingual. You know what I mean? Within the but still be not so we end up wearing a mask because the mask covers. I went to born in DC, grew up in seeing my life getting there. So not very different. We had one high school, everybody went to. You know, students my graduate last.
I can find my business, so I don't think I know. I can't do it.
But it saved my life. I had a lot of life. So that awakened this level of social consciousness in me, and I was much better for it. What's your name? Beverly. Thank you. I love the coffee and lunch and stuff. All right. All right. I think we're right at that time. Okay. So
we have up to this point spoken about the context for working with our youth, and please we'll use youth and students kind of interchangeably. But the particular youth that we're working with here, of course, is foster care youth. And the reason why I am excited about that is because they are marginalized probably more than their peers, right? Because not only have they faced such intense home life strife that the state has determined that it is in the best interest of this child to remove that child from the home, right? It has bubbled up to the point where the state is involved. That's really interesting because a lot of oppression can go unseen, right? And can be hidden inside of families or whatever else, right? But when it's bubbled up so much that the state has determined sort of we need to be involved now and remove this child from their home setting, then often we can say that they really find themselves as marginalized. And we know, of course, you all know better than I in terms of some of the statistics around the life trajectories for foster care youth, right? In terms of incarceration rates and dropout rates and things like that. And then also their prevalence in discontinuing care as soon as they are aged out of foster care. Sometimes even before. It's quite interesting because there's a continuum of services, aren't there? Right? In many cases, right? There are certain programs that are available for foster care youth, right? What percentage of those that you work with continue on with those beyond 18? A lot? A little? What? Do many of your youth that you work with continue on with care, even if they're allowed to? I mean, I know that there are some programs out there, at least within the context where we live, that provide for services continuing care up to age 21 or so, right? Right? How many of those youth that you work with continue on that gap between 18 and 21 continue on with services? A whole lot? Not a lot, right? I mean, I'm hearing things like scholarships and other things, and many of them don't, right? You know, why is that?
Because they're so done with it. They're done with being part of somebody telling them to do the right thing with their family.
Yeah, yeah. Sort of system or agency involvement fatigue, right? You know, so we were speaking. So I do a workshop called, working with students in poverty, and sort of taking this work of Ruby Payne. Are you all familiar with the work of Ruby Payne? Right. So I take some of that, right? I take what I think is the good stuff, and I leave some of the garbage away because I don't completely agree with Ruby Payne, right? I'll go out there and say that. But I think that it's anchored in a lot of really, really good stuff, and then there's some stuff that I believe is crossed over into the idea of broad, some ugly generalizations, right? And deficit thinking, right? That doesn't adequately depict my people, those that grew up in poverty, right? And so I take some of that and leave the rest alone. But but what I know to be true is that when I spoke to, for instance, I spoke to a person and they asked me a question. Well, you know, Malik, this is a teacher in Sussex County, Delaware, and she said, I went and took a child to the movies or something like that, or some kind of activity. The teacher had gone over to the child's house, and the father didn't even get out of the car to come and meet me, but allowed his 7-year-old son to get out of the car, come over and meet with this strange woman, get in her car, and leave. Well, like, how could he do that? How could he be so callous and just allow me to take his child? You know? And doesn't he care at all about his child? And not only to go and defend a father who I think is probably, has some issues going on, but what I try to explain to her is he might just be so used to people who look like you, young white women, coming and taking his child and going and doing things. Because after all, that's what most service providers look like and are, right? And so it might be a little bit of system fatigue, And so certainly I would imagine that some are so disempowered and they're involved in the system for such a long time that by the time they get 18 years or older, they're sort of like, I'm done. Just leave me alone. Right? Is that your experience?
A lot of them want to go back home. who've been in the system for years and years and years, they want to go home. They want to see what, what they missed. They want to reconnect.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
We've got a lot of kids on this side of the bridge that are originally from the other side of the bridge.
Sure.
And so
Baltimore and
it's really
Athens.
hard for them to stay connected to their family.
Sure. Sure.
They don't feel like they belong here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a, are you all familiar with The Wire?
Mm-hmm.
Right, the HBO series, right? So there was a young man in The Wire, and he had to escape from Baltimore City because he was caught in some issues. Do you all remember that episode? It's like season 1 or 2 of The Wire. But it takes place in Baltimore, of course, right? And we used to live in Baltimore, and I was a teacher in Baltimore City. And so this child was caught up in the drug game, and he had to leave Baltimore City. And so he ended up being somewhere in the sticks in the Eastern Shore. Right? Living on someone's farm somewhere, we don't know, sort of, they didn't go into details. And eventually he just felt like he had to escape. And he did. And he got a ride somehow back to Baltimore City. You know? Spoiler alert, he was killed either that episode or the next episode or so. But there, being there, where the concrete jungle of Baltimore City at the time, it was called Bodymore, Murderland, right? Was still better than being away. And so we stretch that analogy, of course, to being in a home where there's a lot of violence and strife and all of that is sometimes in our minds and our hearts, that's still home, right? And so the idea here is that part of our work really has to be about family power and creating family power. Because too much of what we find ourselves doing is disempowering families, albeit sometimes with really good intentions, right? And I'm not necessarily just referring to birth families, right? But some of the work that we have to do with foster parents is also about empowerment, isn't it? Right? Helping them understand how to effectively use power, right? How to wield it in such a way so it's for the positive betterment of those that are in their homes, right? That they are serving, right? Or maybe with permanent families, with those adoptive families, and how do they become empowered in order to better serve this child that they've taken into their home, right? But I think this word empowerment is kind of really important. So when you think of family power, what do you think of? What does it look like? What does it look like? What words come to mind? A family that is empowered, right? Like maybe these guys. Knowledge of what? What do you mean? Okay. So they're aware of what's out there in case we need help. This is who we can go to. Okay. Explain a little bit more.
That the family has a structure, like maybe a hierarchy of who's in charge and who's not, and then that the family itself has a structure of expectations and routine of this is what we do in the morning.
Yeah. That there's maybe some clear roles, right? Doesn't necessarily have to be completely defined, right? But there is a sense of, that we all have a hand in this, right? What we find certainly around poverty, and I think this is one of the generalizations or stereotypes that is true, is that in poverty and also in minority cultures, some minority cultures, that roles are often very flexible, right? That there's structures that are often very flexible. From an outside viewpoint, this can look like chaos sometimes, right? But from an inside viewpoint, that we can see that there, for instance, for African American women, right? There's never really been this big, huge conversation about whether or not African American women should work outside of the home. They always have. Oftentimes in other people's homes, right? So this question around, do I go to work or do I raise the children? No, you're doing both. If you're a black woman in this society, you're doing both, typically, right? And that is certainly stretched to other women as well, But roles are pretty flexible when it comes to many minority settings and folks in poverty as well. So looking for structure, though, there is a sense of kind of structure, right? What else? Communication skills. Okay, that there's a way that we speak to each other to be able to get our points across without violating issues of trust and respect and things like that. What else? Okay. The sense of fairness and equality, right? No favoritism, right?
Not really, overt with punishment, but, giving choices and, allowing for mistakes and, correcting those things.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Go ahead, please.
I think knowing that you are resilient, that you can do better to
Yeah. That our family is victorious, right? That we're not a victim, but that we are victorious. Right? That's interesting. Who's the coach of the San Francisco 49ers? One of the hardballs, right? And then the coach of Baltimore Ravens, right? And so they a couple years back it came out that the way that their father would leave them in the morning when he dropped them off from school is he would ask the two of them a question. Who's got it better than us? And their answer, of course, was nobody, right? And so that's what Jim or John uses with his team out there. That's their cheer. Who's got it better than us? Nobody. And so sort of this idea of, even though we may have it bad, we still have it good because we have each other. I can remember certainly one of the happiest moments in my family's time, occurred when we were in a small little camper. That's, where we lived. And I remember there's a picture of a dinky little tree. You can't even call it a Christmas tree. It was like Charlie Brown's Christmas. It was ridiculous, like a twig with some, And I remember looking at the camera and my lips are kind of twisted. You know that look like. Right? But my dad has a knife. No, my mother has a knife in her hand and a cigarette in her mouth or something like that. Just seems to be a common picture of my mother. And my dad has got a big smile on his face or something like this, So I was the only one that had a stink face on at the time. But I remember having really good times. You know what I mean? Even though we lived in a tent at times, I didn't realize that anything was wrong with that. Something was fundamentally wrong with that, right? But I didn't realize anything. This is just family. This is how we do Christmas. It's fun. Please. So, what does family power look like?
know what I did there.
It's okay. That's okay. So certainly engagement, right? That the family is involved with each other. They're certainly engaged, right, with each other. We are family, right? That there's effective decision making. That when it comes time for decisions to be made, that there's a process usually, right? Input and things like that. But ultimately, some decisions are made and they're made effectively, right? That we're not kind of stuck in limbo. Prevention and responsive interventions. That there are things that we do together to prevent things from becoming huge problems, right? To stay connected and prevent. But there's also a way that we respond to each other effectively when there are problems, right? That it is not okay for my son and daughter, our son and daughter, to not speak to each other because they have problems, right? That's a form of mistreatment to each other. Right? Giving each other the silence. We don't accept that. No. That could go on for a few minutes, right? And then you have to battle it out, because you are going to stay connected. That is a primary thing in our family. You're going to stay connected. So an appropriate way to respond, right? And then, of course, collective and collaborative planning, right? That we're going to collectively decide we're going to do some things, right? And we're going to collaborate together, sometimes with some outside resources, knowing what those resources are, I think, right? So a family that's empowered does these things and many of the other things that I think you guys talked about, right? So, Mike Doolin, and this was interesting, especially for professionals that work with families. And first of all, let me say this. To work with a family, especially inside of a home, maybe a broken home, maybe a challenging family, right, is still an honor. And we need to make sure that we live with that level of integrity, right? For a family to open up their home or their trailer, right, or whatever, to allow you to come in there as a representative of whatever, state agency, whatever, right, carries some weight to it. And we ought to really approach that with honor. I don't allow most people in my home, right? I've never opened the door and allowed a police officer in my home. We can talk, just like I do the religious people that come to my home. We can talk, right? On the front porch. And I'm going to close the door behind me, right? But you're not coming into my home, right? And so to allow folks to come into, for you to be allowed to come into a home or required to go into a home, I think we just need to make sure that we respect that process, You know, we've worked with some therapists in the past that have really been challenged by that because they don't want to sit on the couch because that's where the dog's been. You know, or they don't want to take a 5-minute break and go play Wii with Junior because they feel like they've got a treatment plan that they've got to get through right now. You know, or a whole lot of other kind of circumstances. And so for people to really open that up, I think is really important. So to Mike Doolin's point, I think this is powerful too. He says, I do not believe that professionals can give power to families. This is not the basis of our approach. Rather, families will take power and become powerful when professionals create the right conditions for this to occur. What are your thoughts? What is your reaction to that?
It's not creating dependence, it's creating independence. Giving them the ideas to go with it. Like, here's a bunch of tools, and I'll tell you what each tool does. You go ahead and choose what one's going to work the best for you.
What else?
Just respecting the strengths of the family, recognizing that, and then building on some other things that you collectively come together with, how we can remedy the situation together.
How many of you are familiar with the IM40 Initiative? IM40. No? I'm not going to write this down. Just I, just the letter I, and then AM, the number 40, right? It's an initiative by the Search Institute. It's a national initiative, right? And it builds on the 40 developmental assets, right? So it's an asset-based approach. So the idea, assets versus deficits, right? So these poor foster kids, oh my God, they don't have this, they don't have this, they suffer from this, et cetera, on down the line, right? Versus these foster children have this beautiful ability to survive even in the muck and the mire, right? They have found that they can make friends easily, right? That they have developed quick, sometimes maybe inappropriate, strong attachments to adults. You know, you're my new mom? Okay. You know, please just keep me for longer than 6 weeks, right? They find the ability to find humor even in some crazy situations, you know, and they can find an amazing way to tell stories and things like this. See, the asset building approach versus a deficit approach. So the Search Institute has identified 40 developmental assets that the higher your number of assets, the higher the likelihood is that you will have a positive life experience in childhood and adulthood, right? And so most of the students that we work with, I don't even want to use the word, I'm trying to break myself out of the word at risk, right? But some of the most challenging students that we work with, when we rate them on a scale of the 40 developmental assets, they come in certainly less than 10 and the average is somewhere around 6. Right? When I measure my own children and looking at it through that lens, they're somewhere around 29, 30. Right? And so part of my life's purpose, part of our purpose is we want to shrink that gap. Right? Now, I'm certainly not going to shrink it by taking some things away from my own children. Right? You know, take away the loving home that you have and, and all that other stuff. So I certainly want to build up those students that we're working with. But the point is, though, at least when it comes to families, right, is that we want to look at them from a strengths-based perspective. We want to look at them in terms of assets, right, as opposed to deficits. And I think that's really what Mike Doolin is speaking about here, this idea that we want to help them to become powerful by creating the right conditions for this to occur, so that they become less and less system dependent, right? Now, I'm not of a political nature where, all these welfare people and all, they're taking advantage of the system, I'm certainly on the other side where I think the system is taking advantage of them and things like that. But I certainly don't want to create circumstances where we have families that are dependent upon us to solve problems for them. We want to really empower them and help them to be powerful. That's really what this is all about. Does that make sense? We're together on that? Yeah? Yeah? But it's challenging though, isn't it? Right? It's really challenging. So what what I do sometimes, and we don't have to do this now, but what I do sometimes, I say, throw out characteristics of the perfect family, right? And we kind of did that a little bit, right, in terms of a family that's really empowered. Or better yet, throw out the characteristics of the perfect foster parent, right? And people do that. They're engaged and they're cooperative and they're smart about decision making, right? And all of that, and they do that. And then I take away the heading and I say, let's take away these as characteristics of a positive foster parent or a positive teacher, right? And let's talk about you and put your name on the top there. How many of those can we start crossing off? Right? Are there fundamental differences between someone who's a wonderful foster parent and someone who serves them? And so that helps people when we put that mirror up, that if we're not these things all the time, how do we have some expectations for the foster parents to be on point all the time? Or teachers, or other folks, right? Or foster kids. So, please. Okay, so challenges to family empowerment. We're just going to kind of run through a couple. The traditional role of professionals as fixers and answer givers. You guys experience that? Right? Just tell me what to do with this crazy little Johnny. You know what I mean? You need to fix him, and if you can't fix him, put him on respite. Right? I know that word too. That's a little secret word you guys have, right? Put him on respite. I need to go away for the weekend. I'm heading up to Rehoboth or something like that, right? And this little cat can't go with me. Right? Say it again. Every weekend. Yeah, every weekend. Yep. Oh, and by the way, they've got a dental appointment tomorrow, and I can't go. Right? You got to take them. I know the issues, right? Deficit versus asset framework. We spoke about that a little bit. Family learned helplessness and overdependence. Right? Learned helplessness and overdependence. And again, I'm referring to not only the birth family, but also the foster child himself. Right? You need to sit here and help me with this. Right? Or I don't know how I'm going to get to school. You live a mile away. Walk. Right? Right? But I don't know the way. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to make that phone call. I don't know. The sort of idea of learned helplessness. Go ahead. I think you had something.
Yeah, I think some of that comes from being system savvy because they know why you're there is the extent of the agreement. Unbooked agreement.
Yeah. And this is true. System savvy. I think that's a real thing. I make a conscious choice to choose to believe that people bring the best to the table, right? So I choose to believe that much of it comes from learned helplessness as opposed to intentionally trying to manipulate. You know what I mean? Now we can say that that's a flaw in my fundamental belief about the nature of human beings, right? We could say that, but at the end of the day, it allows me to not look at this little 5-year-old and say, aha, you're trying to manipulate me, you little bastard, right? and say, I need to work with you because you will feel so much better about yourself once you can do and choose to do. You know what I mean? So, okay. Systemic disunity and the lack of agency collaboration. I mean, that's real. We often have sometimes conflicting agendas, right? And we have a hard time speaking together, and there's often sometimes histories of dysfunction between our agency communication. And we believe, after all, it is so much easier because we have bleeding hearts. Most of us, backgrounds in social work or education or psychology or counseling or whatever, right? And so we love these 4 people that we're working with, right? And the real issue is those people over there. They just won't give you the services. They won't come and pick you up and take you to your doctor's appointment or whatever, So we begin looking at our peers. We look horizontally, right? And say, well, they're not doing their job. And if they would just do their job. I've even heard principals say the main issue that I have in my school is with the adults. Right? The main issue is with the adults. These poor children, if they just had better adults in their lives, in order to serve them. you know, and some of us secretly harbor that ourselves, right? The challenge is that if you were to take stock of most of the adults that come there, most of them are absolutely dedicated to serving you. They make a lot of mistakes, and some are there just to collect paychecks. I'm going to talk about some distinguishing characteristics of these folks. But what's really interesting is when we start saying that the number one issue going on in the lives of these children are the adults, right, then we really are pointing fingers. Because I can guarantee you that they feel the same way about you. I'll speak to the teachers and say, well, the number one problem in this school is that principal. You know, and probably all of the above are true, and then some. You know, does that make sense? Does that jive with your experience? Right? This idea of lack of unity? You know? Okay. All right, so this comes from a practice called restorative practices. How many of you are familiar with restorative practices or restorative justice? Right? So restorative justice comes out of from an approach in the 60s working with offenders, working inside of prisons and jails and saying, listen, at the end of the day, these folks are going to come out, right? And so we're going to have to work with them in order for them to be productive because the recidivism rates that we have are shameful, right? Something like 80% in one of the detention centers in Wilmington called Ferris, right? Inside of 6 months of being released from detention center, you'd have a 70% retention or recidivism rate. 70% recidivism rate, right? And I would guarantee that that's probably similar, unless the jails and prisons here in Maryland are just dynamic, right? And the juvenile detention centers in Maryland are dynamic. Now, someone who was in a juvenile detention center in Maryland, they're not dynamic. At least they were back then when I was 7 locks, right? It certainly wasn't dynamic. So the point is that there were some activists that said, we've got to work with these folks, and we've got to have a way for the victims to have their voices heard, right? So follow this logic. When when harm occurs, right, then there's, we call them offender and a victim, right? That when harm occurs, it creates obligation, right? Most of that obligation is on the part to be fulfilled by the offender, right? It creates obligation. And so the victim has needs that need to be fulfilled by the offender fulfilling that obligation. Here's what's fundamentally wrong with our current system. And I don't care if it's the justice system or the school discipline system or anything other than that, right? Is that we focus solely on punishment around what happens with the offender, right? How much time is he or she going to get, right? Are they going to be found guilty? How much time, right? We don't look at all about the victim's needs. So we don't talk about are the victim's needs fulfilled, right? And so, long story short, what restorative justice was doing was trying to find a way to bridge that, meet the needs of the victim, and bring the offender to accountability, right? And fulfill those obligations, right? And anchor both of those inside of the community. Restorative justice is wonderful, but it is reactive. Harm has to occur. What if we could create a process that would be both reactive or responsive and also preventative? And so that's the outgrowth of restorative practices. Here's the fundamental truth of restorative practices: that families are happier, more cooperative, more productive, and likely to make positive changes when those in authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. Does that make sense? Yes? Take out the word families and put in you. Is it still true? Yeah? Put in me. I. Is it still true? Or organizations. Right? Is it still true? Right? So this is a fundamental truth, right? That when those in authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. We often find ourselves living here and here, right? We'll put sanctions on people, right? Maybe foster kids, right? We put sanctions on them, or we put sanctions on foster parents, right? All right, well, you didn't fulfill your obligation, so you're not going to get that check, right? Or you didn't do this, so therefore this, right? Or we will do things for them. And then we find ourselves not attending our own child's soccer game because we've got to take this child here and go to Walmart and buy him a whole new wardrobe, right? And we're thinking, hold on, I thought this was the job of the whatever. You know? Does that make sense? All right, we're going to talk about that. Let me let me switch. This you have this what is called the social discipline window. You have this in your packet, I believe, right?
It's not also.
No.
Okay.
I know. If you don't, this is something you definitely want to write down, but you'll take some notes on this. So, social discipline window. So, with the social discipline window, this I think is a wonderful way for us to understand the exercise of power. There are two lines. The horizontal line represents control, right? I believe that would translate into expectations, setting ways and structures to hold folks accountable, basically get them to do what it is that needs to be done. The horizontal line represents support, right? Being nurturing, being loving, right? So let's talk about the bottom left-hand corner, low control and low support. I'm standing right in the way. Low control and low support, typified by the word not. Because the reality is these folks are not engaged. These foster parents, we'll talk about them, or foster kids are not engaged, right? They have low control, right? They couldn't get the child to go to bed on time if they wanted to. If you promise them that you will triple their payment, if you could establish a bedtime and have this child in bed, right, so they can get a full 8 or 9 hours of sleep, so they can have a wonderful day the next day, right? They would have to argue, listen, I'm going to try, but you're probably going to have to keep your money because this is just not going to happen, right? Low control and low support, the folks that are in the not category, because they're like, listen, at the end of the day, I don't really care. I'm not going to baby them. I'm not going to provide. I don't want to hear all of their drama stories. Save that drama for the birth mama. I'm just not interested, right? You know, but you better make sure that that compensation is on time, right? But not typified by neglect, inattention, mistreatment, abandonment, no follow through. Sound familiar with some folks that we work with? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Let's go to high control, low support. High control, low support. So in the upper left-hand corner, the word to. Because these folks love doing things to people. They love it, right? It is my way or the highway. I run a tight ship. I don't play around. I'm no joke, right? I'm serious, right? You come into my house and blah, 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 blah. You know? I used to say when I was a principal, you're either going to fall in line or you're going to fall down. But it is absolutely going to be Mr. Muhammad's way in here. I don't play. I'm a 2 by nature. My nature is a 2. You know? This is the way that I would talk to students. Oh, really? This is what happened today? You know? I mean, there are some stories that, you know, it was about intimidation. There's some stories that I should not be proud of. You know? And I'm not going to brag with you guys because you'll report me. I heard a little bit of the previous presentation, right? I'm gonna get myself in trouble. I already spoke to some reporters and police officers this week, right? Typified by words like dominance, exclusion, right? Isolation, intimidation, zero tolerance. Zero tolerance equals zero intelligence. Punishment, authoritarian, fear, right? High control. What these children need is a strong hand. Spare the rod, spoil the child, right? We can't baby them because the world is hard, right? Sound familiar? You have some folks that you work with like that, right? Don't tell me about all those issues that was going on in that old house that you were in, right? You're in my house now. You're gonna get up at 5:35, you better make sure that that bed is made, and you are downstairs at 5:36. And I can smell toothpaste on your mouth. Right? I'm not saying that rules and any of that is bad, right? I'm saying that these folks are really about that. They live in the land of rules and law and order. And if we break one rule for one person, then the whole world goes to the apocalypse. That's what they do, right? You hear that language all the time, right? Well, if I do it for this one, then I've got to do it for all the others. Really? Really? Is that life? Really? I mean, the reality is we have a speed limit, but not everyone has to follow that speed limit, right? The police can go however fast they want to, right? Emergency vehicles can go however fast they want to. You know? Go ahead, please.
I'm a treatment foster care worker locally, so we bring in the foster kids who are the most at risk, the most mentally ill, behavior issues, emotionally traumatized, and although we license our foster parents to handle much more difficult foster kids, they burn out.
Yeah.
The longer that they deal with very aggressive, running away kids, if you steal out of their pockets, you know, that they become jaded and they evolve into that kind of parenting style. The newest recruits, the parents who are the green behind the ears, who have patience of the saints, who have compassionate love and tolerance for these kids, and not get burned out.
Yeah.
They don't resemble that, but the parents who've been doing this longer than they can count, they just naturally adopt that, and it's sad because they don't have the insight that other foster parents would, that their style is
but
very reactive.
But they'll say, I used to be like you, right? I used to have a soft heart. You know, this idea, I use a lot of references to schools because I used to be a teacher, I think I mentioned that. But there's this notion in schools that, you know, some great advice that the veterans will tell new teachers is don't smile until January. Right? You gotta be hard. You gotta be really mean, right? Until about January, and then maybe you can crack a smile here or there or whatever, right? The problem is, what if I naturally like to smile? What if I'm that guy that being authentically who I am is that? You know what I mean? And there's a big difference, I think, between being that and maybe being a pushover. Let's go into that now. So you got the left side of that line, right, in terms of support. Both of those, what they have in common, the not and the two, is that they're about no support or very low support. Does that make sense? Right? Let's go to another extreme. So another extreme is, of course, the bottom right-hand corner, and that's low control, right? Couldn't get folks to do things if I wanted them to, but high support. The word for. Oh my God, these babies, I just love them. Oh, we got to have a turkey drive, and we got to, you know, save money for this, and, you know, and little Esmeralda, yeah, she punched a police officer in the mouth and spit on so-and-so, but I'm raising a fund to send her to France next week. Right? You know, and yes, so-and-so came into school without their uniform, but listen, you know, they're trying really hard, so we got to go down and we got to, you know, wash their uniform by hand and, you know, so on and so forth, right? So these folks love doing things for others, right? Here's the reality. Most of you fall into that category. I mean, you're the bleeding hearts. You love it. You love it. Oh, my God. That's why you got into this field. You didn't get into this field to tell people what to do, right? You got in this field so that you can really help them. You know, you won't believe how many young people we interview for various positions, and we ask them, you know, well, what do you want to do, you know, with your life? What's your purpose? Oh, I just want to help people. Oh, my God. Just let me do it any way I can. You know what I mean? I just really want to help these poor babies. Now, some of that is rooted in this idea of paternalism, right? And this notion that, you know, they are the other and they are the less than. So let me help the less than, you know, as opposed to they are my equals and they're just a human being that might have a different human condition than I do, you know. But typified by words like laissez-faire, lack of faith, and I'm going to get back to that one. Permissive, pushover, soft, and environments and institutions, they'll call these are the softies. You know, kid, these are the ones that people say they get manipulated all the time. You know, a child can act really, really bad, but they'll know you'll give them a piece of candy. You know, or take them to McDonald's on their way home from being bailed out. You know, things like that. But they were hungry, you know, and I have to feed them, you know, right? Some of you are putting your head down like, that's me. I know. I've done it before, right? But let me go back to this idea of lack of faith, because here's what's really interesting. Most folks fall into the two extremes of being a 2 or being a 4. Both of them share this idea of lack of faith. Lack of faith, right? Because the 2 has a lack of faith that you can't do it on your own. I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you what to do, right? I'm going to set very rigid rules for you because I don't believe that you have any self-regulation, right? The 4 also shares a lack of faith. You can't do it on your own, so I'm going to do it for you, right? You can't do it on your own, so I'm going to do it to you, right? Or you can't do it on your own, I'm going to do it for you. Does that begin to make sense? Right? Okay. All right. Let's go to the upper right-hand corner. High control, high support. With. Right? This notion of walking with. Now, think of someone from your childhood who was extremely positively influential in your childhood. Perhaps it was a teacher, maybe a youth minister, a coach, something like that. I'm thinking of someone kind of outside of your home. Right? But someone that had a positive influence on you as a child. You have that person in your mind's eye? Yes? Where did they fall on this grid? They're in the with category probably, right? Now, if you're anything like me, sometimes Mr. Fox, that was my guy, right? He was definitely in the 2 category. You know, I felt like he was a tyrant at times, especially if I didn't come in with my homework, right? And other times, I'm sure he was in the 4 category. In fact, when we first started our relationship, he was absolutely in the 4 category. He was doing things for me that I should have been, a weight that I should have been carrying him on. Right? He was definitely in the 4 category. But certainly, most of the time, he was in the with category. The folks that you were thinking about, were any of them in the not category? I'll tell you, because if they were, you messed up on the exercise and my directions. Right? Right? All right, so with is characterized by words like restorative, authoritative, balanced, effective, leaders, coach. The most legendary people in our lives can be characterized by this, right? That wonderful supervisor that we had, right? That awesome coach that we had. That mentor that we have, right? Aren't they many of these words? Yes? And if you don't have a supervisor or mentor or anything like that, just get my card, come work for us. Right? But I mean, the reality is that the legendary people that we have in our lives, that the most memorable people, the most impactful people, they were this, weren't they? Yes? Aren't these many of the things that we want to be for the young people? For those that we serve, right? When I was first teaching, all I wanted to do was be a teacher that was on par with Mr. Fox. That was it. I wanted to have as much of an impact so that 30 years later, someone would be able to stand up and say, Mr. Muhammad did this for me. You know what I mean? So right at this very moment, I hope there's about 6 cats out there in the world saying, Mr. Muhammad did this for me. You know, I'm trying to make it 600, right? But this is the width. Now, think about the people that you serve, and where do you find yourself most of the time? Think about those that you serve, either those youth or their families or others. Where do you find yourself most of the time? Who's a brave soul? Go ahead.
In the middle at the crossroads. Because it really depends on who I'm with. It really does. There's some kids who think they are rule the world.
Yeah.
And I'm more on that authoritative side. And then there's some where you're just like, oh, bless the heart. You know,
Yeah. That's funny because bless your heart means something different in the north and the south, right? You know what I mean? In the south is the most sarcastic and no, it's horrible. Like don't let someone say bless your heart to you, right? In the south, because it's a way of them, like you'll fall down and be like, they'll say bless your heart. And the problem is, and it's very sarcastic often, right? But it's done in a real sneaky way, right? And the only comeback, because you can't be like, no, you stinking person, don't say bless your heart. You can only say, oh, no, bless your heart more. Right? That's all you got. You know what I mean? That's all you got. But in the north, bless your heart really means bless your heart. Right? We have other ways of insulting people insinuously, right? All right. So you're saying that you kind of find yourself in the middle or really all over the map sometimes, right? Right? Do we find ourselves in the 2 category? Right? In the 4? Right? In the with? Right? In the not? Most of us would be like, no, I'm never in the not. Wake up with a migraine. You'd be like, to hell with that today. I'm not doing that. You just might have to go respite this weekend. You know what I mean? You did not do this when, Ravens are playing, Dallas. I can't believe that you did this on this weekend, right? This is true. I mean, sometimes we're in the not category. We just don't feel like it. It's just not happening, right? We find ourselves all over the map. Most people, and I've done this now for thousands of people probably, right, this training. Here's the reality. That if we find ourselves all over the map, we always come up with excuses why. Right? I'm here because that's what they need. They need a stiff hand. This particular kid, he's really manipulative. I'm only giving him what he needs, so I'm being a 2. Right? Whereas this kid, for me, it was Troy, right? And Brianna, right? They needed me to be a 4. That's what I was saying to all of my staff members. When Troy would spit on the floor or punch somebody in the face and they bring him around to my office, Ms. Muhammad, we need for you to deal with this guy. What they really wanted me to be was a 2, right? Drop their hammer on Troy, right? But I turned around and I was a 4. And I would end up playing chess with Troy. And they'd come around and they were pissed off because they look into my office, looking in my windows, people, right? They look in my window and see I'm laughing with Troy. We're playing chess and things like this, right? And somebody's wiping blood off their mouth from where Troy had punched them, right? So I was being a 4. But I was saying that's what Troy needed at the time, right? And then others, the vast majority of students, they really need for me to be a with. Here's the problem with that. It sounds great, right? It sounds like it's in line with the IEPs, right? We're giving them what they need and, all of this, right? The reality is that we are often putting the locus of control externally instead of internally. The kind of leader that I want to be, the kind of person to serve others that I want to be, is in harmony with my own values, not the way the wind blows. Because what I also know is I would be a 2 right around 2 o'clock in the afternoon if I hadn't eaten lunch. Right? The monster would come out, like that Snickers commercial. Right? I'm a dragon. I mean, literally. And finally, after working with me for about a year, the staff started realizing, this guy's really a jerk right around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Somebody feed the guy. Right? And so literally, I'd find food on my desk after, songs. I'd come back to my office. Wow, food magically appears, and I'd eat all of it, right? And then I'm fine. I'm back in the with category, Or if I'm having a particular hard day, sometimes I might even be in the 4 category. Listen, all right, you can't do this assignment. I'll just do it for you, man. And I'll do this particular thing, right? And so the problem is I wouldn't be using my values to guide me. It wouldn't be anchored. My decision would be based on my values. It would be based on my mood or the time of day, or what I thought the kids needed. The reality is Troy needed for me to be here, not here. And those kids that I was working with and I was here really needed for me to be here. And that was more in line with my values, even though I was a natural here. So I'm a with now. Well, I'm going to say this. I'm a reformed 2. I'm a 2 in rehab. Right? And I've been saying no, 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 right? I've been in rehab and I'm trying to be a whip nowadays, right? Okay. All right. So here's what I want to do. I want to save the next part, just the last slide that you guys have on there, maybe for after lunch. Talk a little bit about how does this kind of play out? What are the activities that we do that are more in the with category, especially when we work with youth and their families? Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. All right. Are there any questions for us to be thinking about, Christina and I, during lunch, and we want to make sure that we get into right afterwards? What has kind of popped up? You jotted down on the margins or whatever else. Go ahead, please.
Like the intervention that you would use to become a wit. Like, what have you been being taught in your rehab stead?
Yeah. Yeah. Those are secrets I can't share. I'm not at that stage. No. That's exactly what we're going to get into. Yep. What else? Okay. Kathy, I'll turn it over to you. I'm not sure where we're going.
I think we're going to lunch.
Heather? 12:30, I'm gonna get a check, but I guess do you want to briefly talk about after they finish our presentation, after lunch, what our goals are, what your goal is after lunch?
I can. I kind of talked about it earlier, but you're going to finish your presentation after lunch, and then I'd like to have time for interaction, questions and answers, and a discussion type thing. And then my idea was that we take what we've learned today and see how we can apply it in our own workplace, wherever we are. Thinking in terms of coordination of care within counties. I don't know what counties we have here. Where's Wycomico? All right. Oh, you're all sitting over there. Wycomico, Worcester. Do we have Worcester folks? All right. Dorchester, Somerset. All right, we got a lot of Somerset, a lot of Wycomico, and one Talbot. Joey, anything else now? You're gonna have to go with one of the other groups. So leave anybody out. So we'll probably divide into two groups. And I think we've got a nice mix of different agencies, different occupations, different ways of looking at things. And if you don't want to use a real case, I personally would like to see you use a real case that you can apply some of this to and how can we do this better. But you can make up one. Somebody can make up one and say, well, this is what we're going to work on. But this is more of a discussion of local things and how we do things locally and how this might apply. So that's how I see the afternoon going. And as long as you're able to stay and be part of that discussion, that would be absolutely wonderful.
Yep. Okay.
So I guess we are.
You can take a little break. It's not quite ready yet. I'm sure they got them involved in one thing, if you haven't signed in, please do, because we want to make sure that we have your name and your images for your school meeting. I think the majority of you have them. If you've seen it late or skip the sign-in sheet, please make sure you sign in.
And related to that, every session that you're here, you will get CEUs. And then at the end of the 7 sessions, if you have attended every session, or if you, I have to tell you, I don't think this video is going to be very good, but if you miss a session, then you have to watch the video, look at the handout, and you'll get a certificate at the end of the 7 sessions saying that you have competencies in working with foster care children. So that's about it. You want to say anything else
No.
to the group? Any questions for them before we go? Okay, we'll take a break and have some lunch.
All right. What are we having for lunch? Do you know what the lunch is? Or sandwiches
I
or
have
something?
no idea.